Hi, I'm Elizabeth Lampagnano. I became a teacher in 2005, and I have taught middle school mathematics, both brick and mortar and online. But this course came to be because of my son. We discovered in third grade that he has dyscalculia, and it presented itself when we started doing homework together. As a math teacher, I was excited to help him. Unfortunately, I didn't really know the proper tools, even after having taught for so many years. So I learned a lot about dyscalculia and a lot of the teaching strategies that I needed to use at home with him. So I decided to make a course to help you, the teacher, help your students in your classroom, whether they do or don't have dyscalculia. Don't worry if you are not familiar with dyscalculia. There are several people out there that have studied dyscalculia and have come up with lots of wonderful information. I'm going to introduce you to two of them. One of them is Brian Butterworth. And as you can see here, he talks a little bit about what dyscalculia is and that it really is a learning difference. And I've linked his website below, so you can definitely check him out as a resource. Another great resource that I've come across is the website EduCalc Learning. I do have it linked here. Dr. Honor Wall has created a website that has trainings for teachers where you can earn your 3 grad credits if you need that for your certification. Other courses you can take that are just for teachers to learn about dyscalculia. And she also has courses specific to students with this learning disability that homeschoolers or um, your district could use for those students in your class. So we're going to hear just a little bit about how Dr. Honor Wall describes what dyscalculia is. And if you would like more information, you can visit her website that is linked here as well.
Dyscalculia is a legal and medical term. This is a diagnosis of a specific learning disorder with an impairment in mathematics. It is part of the same family of specific learning disorders as dyslexia, dysgraphia, dyspraxia, a few others that you may or may not have heard of. It is not the same as dyslexia. It is not dyslexia with numbers. It affects a totally different side of the brain, and we'll talk about that in future podcasts. And it has a completely different impact on memory, learning, recall, classroom experience. One of the hallmarks of this math learning disorder is that the brain dumps math information over time. So, teachers, you are correct. Your student did know this information on Tuesday, and here it is Friday, and they look like they've never seen it before. In a way, they really haven't. They've already lost the information that they've learned. So, there are different ways that we can store memory outside of the parietal lobe, which is the part of the brain affected by this learning disorder. And there are different ways we can help students get through the classwork in front of them so that they can learn and remember in a different way and reach some math success.
Okay, so now that we've learned a little bit about what dyscalculia is, let's go ahead and start focusing on how are we going to help these math students. So for the rest of this course, make sure you're taking notes. Make sure you're ready to learn a little bit about the strategies you can use in class to help all your math students and specifically those with dyscalculia. What is it you can change right now that will help your students focus a little bit more on the content? One of those things is reducing cognitive load, and my strategies are here to help. And then what happens when those early finishers are done? Well, we have some enrichment ideas, options that you can try out. I think they're great. I've used them before. So let's get started. Now, as we know, with most students, the intrinsic cognitive load is different for everyone. Some students catch on quickly with certain items, others take a little bit longer time to get those steps. A student with dyscalculia is going to have trouble with what we consider to be backward math, like subtracting and dividing. So keep in mind as you're building your lesson, just keep a lookout for the acquisitive face of your students and see where you might need to slow down, give a little extra time. That could also help with this intrinsic piece as we go along. Now, with the extrinsic part of cognitive load, we can definitely remove certain items around the classroom that are not necessary. I remember visiting a school with my son one time that was geared towards students with ADHD and dyslexia. And I recognized in the room that there was not a lot of posters. And they said that was on purpose. So thinking of the surroundings, is there a lot of noise going on? Is it noise that you can prevent or not prevent? Is there music playing? Maybe that's not helpful. Overall, as you're beginning your lesson, just making sure that the surroundings are a good place for all students to kind of be able to focus where you need them to focus at that time. And that's something that teachers do a lot already. And some things you just can't avoid, but it's definitely another piece as far as reducing the cognitive load for your students that you can uh, think about change as needed. So as we think about how can we merge these two types of cognitive load together, there's just simple little tools that we could talk about. If you're using an online game or an online system for testing, there's actually some cognitive load in the student learning. Where is the calculator, or where is the next button, or where is the play button if it's supposed to read to you? So again, taking that little extra time, 1 or 2 minutes, to make sure they know where the things are that they're looking for can help reduce cognitive load. It can help bridge the gap between how are we getting the information into the student's mind and being able to move it to the long-term memory. And that's where the instructional strategies and the accommodations that we're going to talk about come into play. So, with the goal in mind of reducing cognitive load, 3 areas are going to work together: the way that you give your instruction, how you allow students to practice the material, whether it's in the classroom or at home or both, and how you provide help. Is your classroom set up for small groups, people working on their own? Do you have share pair partner set up? Just thinking about how we give the material, what we allow the students to do when they're practicing the material, and how does that help them? So you'll notice I put good start on this slide here. So this is a set of notes that was sent home with my son a few weeks ago. We were doing homework and I was so excited. I was like, yay, we have worked examples. So helping him practice the process, not just giving him the answer that he's looking for, because that's what he wants, just the answer, but making sure that he knows how to work with the worked example to trigger what the step is that needs to start, then next, then finish, and so on. But as we were working through this, we discovered that there was a little bit of misinformation or missing information. In the first worked example, it says multiply the percent times the number. But then in the worked example part, it has changed that percentage to a decimal point, but it doesn't say that in the notes. So he was multiplying 26 times 50 and not getting the correct answer. And we discovered it's because he's supposed to first change that percent to a decimal. So that was one reason why the paper got good start, because it's really great to have that worked example, but we need to make sure it has every step, every time. If you say it, write it. If you write it, say it. And then going forward, I remembered as a math teacher, there's another way that we can find the correct answer, and we can use a formula that maybe he would remember more easily, not having to change that percent to a decimal. We can use the formula as shown on the paper here, and then we could talk about, how to use that formula to get the answer. Plus, that formula that you see on the paper helps with the many different ways that the question can be given. So we have to remember one formula, or we have one cue card, so to say, that we could put on the worked examples paper to trigger what's going to happen, but it works for three different types of questions. So again, trying to reduce that cognitive load for your student. You're not giving them the answer, you're just helping them to remember a process that you practiced and how they can then use it themselves to get to the answer. Okay, so one technique that I came across when I was just kind of watching many different videos online about reducing cognitive load was the idea of priming the mind, right? Getting it set up to do the work. So that made me think about, how are you going to introduce a topic to your students? And as I was writing these questions that you see here on the screen, it kind of became aware that some of these questions might be for you, the teacher, before you even present the lesson to your students. And some of the questions might be more of the ones that you actually ask the students when you present the material. So priming became kind of a twofold area. The teacher priming themselves on what topic they're going to do, next week or tomorrow, and what are the things you need to make sure you cover for this topic. So, thinking about an upcoming lesson in your mind, what are some questions you would ask yourself as a teacher? What information do I need to make sure that I present to my students for this topic? And what questions do I want my students to think about as we get started with the topic? So priming in two different ways. So here's just a quick example of, one way I see this going in class. Now, if this is what I display on the board for the students to look at, then my questions become a little bit more of discussion based with my students, like giving them a minute to look at it, not being afraid to pause as well. Really, just putting it up there, not asking any questions, letting kids raise their hand if that's what they want to do, just letting them take it in, and then ask the questions of, what do you think about this topic? Or what is something that looks familiar to you? What is something that we've maybe done before? You know? And then I bring this up because thinking of scenarios where students might use the information is a way to prime the pump, so to say. And it can be done in different ways to engage the students, to grab their attention, to bring them into the activity or bring them into the assignment, right? So I just wanted to throw that in there. Okay, so this is the other technique I quickly mentioned a few slides ago. So for weeding, we want to think about, obviously, taking things out, right? Like trying to get those weeds out of the garden, trying to get those weeds out of our grass. And they pop up a lot, they keep coming back, but our intention is to take them away, remove the chaos from the garden, remove those things that take away from the flowers, right? So the idea is the same for your instruction content. Weeding is a way to really narrow the focus down for your students and to not have the fluff, which is very helpful to that neurodivergent student. they really need the help with the focusing part. And so weeding is the next technique. Now, you might think it's the same as priming, but again, remember, priming is trying to engage the students, get them thinking about the information. Weeding is really a teacher centered idea where you're taking out stuff before you even present it to your students. Okay. So, with the weeding process, we also want to think about how can we make the practice pages we want our students to use more beneficial. So, you'll hear about in the next set of slides how the look of the page needs to have some weeding done itself so that the student's mind can focus on what you want them to learn as opposed to all the fluffy stuff. So here's an example of, you know, a Google search I did, once again, my favorite, of a worksheet on subtracting fractions. So the one on the left has a lot of text, a lot of writing on there. And honestly, if you just finish doing 3 questions with them on the board about subtracting fractions, and this is the page you want to give them to do some stuff in the classroom, does it really need a big title? Does it really need lots of instructions? And then let's say you find a wonderful worksheet online and you're like, I just need them to do 4 questions in class. That's their exit ticket or whatever you like to call that thing, ticket out the door, classwork, whatever. Can you take that page to the photocopy machine, hit the 200% zoom, and just get, 4 questions on the page? And then that's what you give them. Notice on the right hand side, that's an idea similar to that thought, is you have fewer questions on the page with a lot more space, and it's providing the focus of the practice. We don't have lots of instructions. You literally just did it 3 times on the board with them. They have maybe notes that you ask them to put in their book that they can reference if they need to. The title's still kind of big, but you can see the difference from the left side to the right side. And with your students that have dyscalculia, they really need that space for their mind to be able to focus on the content and to feel like it has less cognitive load going on by providing that space part. With this slide, we're going to take a look at, are we presenting information to our students that's going to help reduce the cognitive load and inform them of the topic that we want to do? So I did a Google search on absolute value, found this, what I thought to be a really fun, nice, poster style item. I showed it to my son and asked him, what can you learn about absolute value from this picture? And he said, why is it so bunched up? And what are those arrows for? And I guess absolute value is 0 because all the arrows are pointing to 0. So it didn't really teach him what I thought he should learn about absolute value. So on this slide, you can see a different example of how to present information about absolute value. This particular example comes from one of the courses that Dr. Wall has on her website, specific to students with dyscalculia. So again, I just presented the image to my son and said, what can you learn about absolute value from this picture? And he looked at it for a while and I waited. And eventually he just pointed to that sentence and said, I guess this. And I said, okay, so absolute value means the distance from 0 to a number on a number line. Okay, so that's the definition. He could find it. Easy peasy. It then opened up the discussion of, well, what do those lines around the letter X mean? And, what does it mean to count from this to that? Or, it started the discussion, but he was able to look at it. He was able to find the definition, point it out, and then we were able to go from there. This is probably my most outrageous thought, I think, is remembering that nobody in your classroom works harder than the kid who is struggling and feels like they are failing. They are constantly feeling like they have to play catch up, and that automatically puts them in a position where they are not open to hearing what you're trying to teach. So just keep in mind, yes, I know that the early finishers also can be distracting. Yes, I know it's not a perfect place. Yes, I know not every kid wants to do a coloring page or an extra online lesson. I get it. But just keep in mind, if you were that person sitting in the room feeling like I'm never going to get this, they go way too fast. Why do I have to keep up with Susie over there? Why can't Susie just take a minute and understand there's other people in the room that might need an extra 30 seconds? You know, think about the environment, that extrinsic environment that is interfering with their intrinsic thought process. If you are really looking to help those students, whether they have dyscalculia or a different neurodivergency, keep in mind that everyone in the room should feel like they're part of the team. And so, as much of a struggle as it is for you to come up with 8 different ways to get every kid to focus and pay attention, it's just as important to pick those things that are going to help those struggling students just gain a little bit more confidence, because you'll notice that as soon as they start getting one piece and feeling good about it, feeling good about themselves, they're going to get more engaged with that classroom. They're going to start feeling like they can catch up, and they're going to start wanting to show you what they can do. So always keep in mind the idea, as most educators, we all know, is we want the student to learn the content. We chose this particular item because we like it, we enjoyed it, or maybe we had a terrible classroom environment for this topic and we wanted to change that. And so just don't forget, why you started teaching what you're teaching, why you chose the grade level that you chose, and every little bit here and there where you can help that struggling student feel just a little bit more confident with their skills by providing a worked example, providing extra wait time, giving a paper that has more space for their mind to focus on the content. You are making a difference, and it's a positive one. And that's in the end what we're looking for, is to help the students in the classroom no matter what they're coming with as they walk in the door. So as we finish up with this course on helping our students with dyscalculia, I often think about the times in brick and mortar when I wanted to do a really fun project-based learning activity, and it was always like at the end of something, or it was always at the end of the year after they've already taken the state test and no one's really doing stuff, which those are great times to do fun things. But I started to rethink about when I put in those project based learning items, because they can be things that early finishers can work on. They can be items that you could do as a group activity. They are things that can be integrated throughout the year, and they can help those early finishers or those students who you're hoping to go to the next level when they take that test. Besides the bottom level students needing to raise up, there are those students that are at the very top, and it's sometimes just as hard to get them to move that needle up too, just because they already are at such a high level, right? So enrichment can be not only a way to engage those early finishers, but also a way to incorporate those scenario based items. So a lot of times teachers always have those word problems on their test to apply the information. This might be a way for you to rethink how you apply what you're teaching. Maybe you do a lot of skill drill based items for your practice, for your instructional time, for the homework, and then you create a several weeks long enrichment piece where you're applying the information to what would be scenarios and situations. And then, those students that have been working on them have an option to present it to the whole class if they're okay with that, or have a option to hang it up in the hallway as a way to present it without having to stand in front of the class. You know, there are different ways to apply material than to just answer word problems. And there's always time to practice best methods for word problems before you take that state test that I know a lot of people um, tend to think about. But don't forget, one of the things I mentioned or had written on the other slide was asking your students to grade their own work. If you are having students grade their work for whatever reason, make sure, and I do this with my son in his homework, I make him write out what the difference is. Like if he didn't write anything on the assignment the first time, then we're writing out all the steps in the whole problem. If he went through the steps and we've discovered, oh, this is the part where you went wrong, then he has to fix that part and show that he fixed that part, or he has to write down, this is where I multiplied incorrectly, or whatever it is. And so again, you are building in enrichment for that student one way or the other. And so enrichment is probably going to be another area where I look at after this course, but this is how we're going to end today, what we learned about how to help students with dyscalculia in your classroom.